informational video, maybe one of the most important that I have ever made. I can say with a reasonable degree of confidence that the 50% of you who are already applying these principles will be very happy that you have done so, and I am simply reaffirming the decision that you have made. Whereas the 50% of you that have not, you may significantly and seriously consider doing so. So, to be honest, this intro is kind of anticlimactic for such a significant and, big topic. So, maybe... This is the most important video you will ever see about training!
Who can say where the road goes?
Welcome back to my channel, guys. This is VitruvianQA. Thank you for stopping by. Let's get right into the good stuff. Today's video is on a very important topic because this can directly relate to a lot of you in terms of how you train, and this is something which has affected me. A lot of times I make videos about stuff that I already know, but I think it's very important for me to convey that information to the rest of you. But this time it actually did kind of affect me, and I can say that with confidence I have used this information and changed the way I train. Vastly different from what I did before. Either way, this video is on the topic of training frequency. So basically, is the age-old standard of training each muscle group once per week actually the best? I know a lot of you guys, like myself, when we entered the gym, we were told like the very, very basic stuff. Go, do each exercise, 3 sets of 10, and train each muscle group once per week. So we're talking like, chest day is Monday, and then leg day is Tuesday, Wednesday is rest day, and repeat and repeat. But to be honest, guys, it seems from my research and my personal experience that that's not actually the best way to train. And unlike a lot of stuff I mentioned in my videos related to protein intake, and for example, like I had an informational video on vegan versus non-vegan diets, I'm always saying kind of like it's shades of gray, it's back and forth. No, this is like straight up, this is right. That's not really the case. Anyone not training this way may not be utilizing, their training and nutrition to the best of their ability unless they have a specific, reason for that, which, there are so many external variables you have to take in consideration. But for the general public, this is it. So guys, I'm about to explain 3 reasons for why I switched, and I believe many of you should really seriously consider switching to a higher frequency program. We are talking training 1.5, 2, or even more times per week for each muscle group. And in turn, this involves cutting back on the volume. I know a lot of times I talk about how bodybuilding is volume. You need to do more exercises, more reps, and in turn, you're going to need more rest time. They're kind of like a trade-off, frequency and volume. In fact, there was a great little informal interview done with Matt Ogus and Eric Helms, and he kind of talked about how there is essentially a trade-off. If you are going to have more volume, for example, you're doing legs and you're doing like 25 total sets, maybe you're doing like 5 exercises, 5 sets each, which is, that's a lot. You're gonna be in the gym for like an hour and a half minimum. You're gonna be done. You're gonna be toast. It's probably not in your best interest to get back in the gym and train legs, for a reasonable amount of time, which is why people take usually, like 5, 6, 7 days off before they train again, because they really feel they need that, that adequate recovery time. On the other hand, if you train frequency, training legs, for example, once every 3 to 4 days, you can do that, but you're gonna have shorter workouts. Instead of doing 25 total sets, you may have to do something like 12, 14, 16. We're talking, for example, like, 4 exercises, 3 sets each, or something like that. Your workouts are going to be shorter, as long as you keep up the intensity. You may be in the gym for as little as 45 minutes. This means that you can train multiple times per week, for example, twice per week, or maybe something a little bit less like 1.5 times per week. That's pretty much you train, instead of twice per week, you train 3 times every 2 weeks. So it's like 3 over 2, you get the picture. So that's great and all, but why is this better and why should you guys listen to me? Let's get into some of the reasons. Number 1, muscle protein synthesis. This has been mentioned a couple times in the past, but this is the first time I've really looked into it. But there's a great scientific article I want to mention for you guys. This is Exercise, Protein Metabolism, and Muscle Growth, published in the International Journal of Sports Nutrition and Exercise. So it says, and I quote, "The response of muscle protein metabolism to a resistance exercise lasts about 24 to 48 hours. Thus, the interaction between protein metabolism and any meals consumed in this period will determine the impact of the diet on muscle hypertrophy." So what this is essentially saying is that once you work out, obviously all the food and protein you consume, it's all important. It's all like this one, it's this teamwork, this network of things which have to happen. You have to exercise, you have to sleep, you have to consume protein, you have to consume calories, and that's great. But it seems like according to this article, it only really matters for 24 to 48 hours, meaning that after that maximum, 2-day span of time, you're essentially just resting. Guys, one thing I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt from personal experience and through my research is that when it comes to building your physique, bodybuilding, men's physique, whatever you call it, you always need to maximize the utilization of your resources. Maximize how much protein you are using. Maximize how much utility you get out of training. Maximize how many times you can train or how much you can train. Maximize how much weight you can actually lift, your rest, your sleep, everything. So essentially, if you are training once every 7 days, 7 times 24 is a number that I can't calculate in my head. 48 hours is the only amount of time you really need at the most, which means that anything past that, you're essentially resting just for the sake of resting. Now, I know a lot of you guys may say, well, I need that time because I feel tired. I have other prior engagements. I can't work out 400 times per week, or I just have DOMS, which is delayed onset muscle soreness. Pretty much just you're sore, I can't work out, it hurts, whatever. We will get to that in a minute, but according to this article, essentially, if you want to absolutely maximize the relationship between protein synthesis, muscle synthesis, 48 hours is the maximum time, maximum amount of time you need. Theoretically, after that, you could start training again. And if you maximize this, you maximize gains, theoretically, so good. Number 2, in my opinion, is the most important factor and pretty much the nail in the metaphorical coffin for why I think training higher frequency is a little bit better than training higher volume, but less frequency, less times per week. And that is simply better workouts and heavier weight lifted. A great example of this is the Bulgarian method of squat training, but again, this can pertain to any type of exercise theoretically. It was obviously invented and created by the Bulgarians. I don't remember who exactly, maybe I'll throw up a name here. But it was popularized recently, and I came to know of it through a program offered by Omar Isuf and Greg Knuckles, 2 guys who are way smarter than me, so if you want to check them out, that's not a bad idea. Now, although it's referred to as the Bulgarian method, another very simplistic way of referring to it is simply squat every day. Yeah. When I heard it, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. You're batshit crazy. You want me to do probably the hardest, the most physically taxing exercise, the thing where you put the most amount of weight you can on your back, go down, try your best not to die and get back up, and you want me to do that every day at a reasonably high intensity? And the program is pretty much like, yeah. So the point of this program and why it pertains to this video specifically as, and I quote, maximize fitness accrual while minimizing fatigue accrual. So essentially, get the most amount of bang for your buck. Your buck pretty much meaning what you have to expend, which is fatigue, because let's be honest, we all get tired, both in your workout and in your week in general. When looking at gains in muscle size, doing 4 to 6 sets of an exercise results in about 80% larger effect size than just doing a single set. So, you guys may think 80% more, that's great, but you're doing 4 to 6 times the actual effort. So wouldn't you, through logic, expect 400 to 600% of the muscle gains? That is not the case. The most beneficial set is the first one, with additional benefits decreasing with each additional set. Guys, this may be the one most important thing that I want you to take away from this video. If you forget everything else, why would you do that? But if you remember this, that is the most important thing. This is the concept of diminishing returns over time. It's the law of diminishing returns. It's actually economics principle, but it applies here nonetheless. Pretty much this says that your first set is the most important. Your first set of your first exercise. Everything after that is, it's very important, but not equally as important. And over time, the more and more you do, the less and less significant and important and helpful it becomes. And to really explain and help you guys visualize this, we need to go into the hyperbolic time chamber. Got it. All right, much better. Okay guys, so for the purposes of this demonstration, there are 2 variables you need to understand. Number 1 is muscle gains, and number 2 is muscle fatigue. And the absolute biggest problem, which is why I advocate higher frequency training, is the fact that fatigue is a linear equation. Pretty much the more you do, you're progressively at the same rate going to fatigue more and more. Whereas muscle gains is not the same case. Like I said, diminishing returns, and they diminish quickly, which means you get a lot of benefit in the beginning, less, and then it drops like a rock. It's actually a negative exponential equation. If you guys remember back into, high school, like math and calculus, this is kind of like that. This is important because if you plot both of these variables, these functions, onto a graph, your gains are going to be high in the beginning, but they drop like a rock, and fatigue catches up very quickly, and eventually there's an intersection point. And after that intersection point, you're going to have the negatives outweigh the positives, and it's no longer in your best interest to continue training. Okay guys, let's go into a quantitative example to illustrate this point. So let's say option number one, you are doing more volume, you are training, longer, and you are training less frequently. Let's call this sets, 1, 2, and 3. By the way guys, this is just a random example I made up. This has absolutely no real world application. These are just some numbers which I think really help illustrate this point. So your fatigue, because it is a linear function, you get the same amount of fatigue after every set. It's gonna go up, let's just say a random variable x. So x, Giggity. Your final fatigue is 3x. Now, let's talk about gains. In the beginning, let's say a random number, 40%. That is awesome. That is a lot of, muscle gains, strength gains, everything is good. Your next set number 2, 25%. So still not a bad amount, but it's almost half as much as set 1. And then afterwards, we're gonna go down to 15% for set 3. So, it's gonna keep going lower and lower and lower. Essentially, if you were to keep this going until set number 10, your gains would be like a fraction of what they were in the beginning. And eventually, somewhere around here, sets 3, 4, 5, wherever, just a random number, your fatigue is going to overtake your actual gains. And at that point, you're pretty much doing counterproductive activity. All right, option B, let's say you are doing higher frequency with less volume. So we got sets 1, 1, and 1 because this is one set but done on different days. Essentially, you can call it days 1, 2, and 3. Now, your gains are still going to be 40%, 40%, 40% because these are separate days. Every time you kind of recharge and you come back and you're able to work out with maximum intensity every single time. Your fatigue, similar case, X, X, and X. All right guys, what does this all mean? Let's go over our two options. Option number 1, we have final fatigue at 3x. X per set adds up, do the math. Your final muscle gains is a total of 80%, not bad. Option number 2, we have XXX. Our muscle gain, because it's 40% every time, adds up to a whopping 120%. So you have two different options, same level of physical exhaustion and fatigue, but in this case, again, random example, 40% more muscle gains, more strength gains. Overall, this is better. Okay, so the third and final factor you have to take into consideration isn't really like a very quantitative or scientific one, but it's very important nonetheless, because if you don't have this, you're not going to want to work out and you're not going to work out well and you're going to make no gains. And that is pretty much enjoyment of your workouts. And again, there is a diminishing return or diminishing enjoyment factor. Let's be honest, we all want to lift big weights and we all want to do big movements. That's why every guy knows exactly how much they bench, how much they squat, how much they deadlift. Sometimes I even just call it like bench day. It's not chest day, it's bench day. Instead of leg day, it's squat day, because I go in for the squats and then everything else, it's kind of like Michael Jackson in the Jackson 5. Sorry, Tito. So if you train with higher frequency, you are able to take advantage of that motivation, of that really good, first few sets of your first big exercise. For example, if you're training the legs and you come in and you squat heavy and then you do a little bit afterwards and you come again in, 3, 4, 5 days and you squat heavy again, it's gonna be awesome. You're gonna love to lift heavy. You eventually, you're gonna really look forward to your exercises and your workouts, as opposed to if you're doing squats and it's awesome, and then you follow it up with 7 exercises, each one going 4 or 5 sets, and by the end of it, you're nobody cares how much you do on these little isolations. Everybody loves and talks about the squat. The one's like, hey man, do you wanna know how much I lifted on the good girl, bad girl? Although, I only have experience with bad girls. My girlfriend's gonna kill me for that one. Either way, the final thing that I want to talk about is a few bonus points, both pros and cons. So a big pro for working out more times during the week, so more frequency, doing these big compound lifts like squat, deadlift, bench, or other stuff as well. The more you do it, the more neuromuscular coordination we are going to get, we are going to train. And that is very important because there are 2 ways to get stronger. You can either grow your muscle. Again, muscle growth and strength are correlated. It's not 100% one-to-one correlation, but you know, like if one goes up, chances are the other one's going to go up too. In addition, you could also train to be more efficient in your lift. You do this by performing the lift more and more and more. That's why you have some guys who may have tons of muscle, but they're not so strong in some of these lifts because they may not be, you know, super experienced with them. For example, the Hodge twins are a great example. They have massive legs. They're really, you know, like strong, and you know, they have good quad development, but because they haven't squatted in a long time, I would assume that if they did suddenly jump onto a squat, like I would be surprised if they even broke 3 plates, even though they have great quad development, because you have to train your body to become more efficient. You have to be able to recruit more muscle fibers, and you have to have those muscle fibers work together in synchronization in better ways. Another factor is training higher frequency is absolutely fantastic for beginners and those who may be a little bit newer to fitness or lifting. And although it's still good, you know, later in life when you're like more experienced and stronger, some of these beneficial factors are a lot more pronounced when you're younger and newer to lifting. A big reason in my opinion is because you are less susceptible to injury, because you're probably, you know, not as strong as you will be in the future. With a few years of training, your ligaments and tendons will be able to handle these weights, you know, these poundages a lot more. Your muscle will be able to handle it a lot more. It may be difficult, but in terms of injury risk, it's not as high. You know, when you first go to the gym and you work up to a 1-plate bench press, chances are your tendons and muscles will be able to handle it. This becomes a little bit more problematic later in life, and this brings me to my first con, because when you are stronger, you know, your tendons and ligaments, you know, they grow and they can get stronger, but it's not, they can't really catch up in some instances to your muscles. You actually can in some ways outgrow like all of your connective tissue in terms of strength. That's why these big guys who are benching 3 plates, squatting 4, 5, you know, 6 plates, for them to train higher frequency, it's like you're rolling the dice. It is a bit scary and it is a bit you know, dangerous. So in terms of cons, like I said, injury risk is a big one. You could always burn out. I actually did this kind of back when I tried a push pull legs split 2 or 3 years ago. I tried it for a while, and there's no like, you know, scientific way to explain this. I just burnt out. I constantly felt kind of tired, kind of exhausted. It was a bit difficult, but there are ways to counteract this. Number one, you have to make sure that your protein intake is adequate at minimum. You are sleeping sufficiently. We're talking, you know, at least 7 to 8 hours. You're hydrating properly, and probably this would all be a little bit, you know, more beneficial if you were in a caloric maintenance or surplus. So can you do this on a cut? Absolutely. I'm going to be doing this right now during my you know, Ascension shredding series. But I think it would be, you know, ideal if I was in a caloric surplus, but nonetheless, not the end of the world. Another issue is this concept of getting over soreness. A lot of us, you know, we train and then we may be sore for 1, 2, 3, 4 days in some instances. There are people who really need that full 7 days to get up to like 100% normal, where you're not sore while you're doing any of the movements and you could train again with maximum intensity. This is referred to as delayed onset muscle soreness. A lot of people say that this is just due to lactic acid, and eventually your body will get more efficient at flushing out the lactic acid. By the way, guys, for those of you that don't know, lactic acid is a byproduct of exercise. It's completely natural, don't worry. But that's not the only reason for why you get sore, you know, after a workout. Essentially, according to an article by the Clinics in Sports Medicine, micro trauma, which is pretty much when your muscles have tiny, tiny tears in them, which is how we grow. We work out, we get these micro tears, micro trauma, and then our muscles regrow and rebuild and recover, you know, while we rest, while we sleep, while we eat, using protein. You know, that's the building blocks that go into those micro trauma. Our muscles, you know, come back stronger and bigger. Either way, when micro trauma occurs, there's actually inflammation that happens, you know, in that affected muscle group, muscle area. So it may not be the best thing to train if you still are experiencing that inflammation, that pain. So guys, you have to take this with a grain of salt, because obviously we want to train. I mean, theoretically, I would be training every muscle group every day, and maybe there's a trade-off, because the only way I think that you could realistically do that is if your actual training volume was so low. I think that's how the Bulgarian method works, for example. Like you walk in the gym, legit, I think it was like 1 or 2 very low rep sets, and that's it. And you come back and do it again. In those cases, I think that you won't have issues with being sore, but you have to find that middle ground. You don't want the volume to be too high to the point where you can't train frequently, but you don't want it to be too low to the point where, you don't feel as if you're getting a sufficient workout, and essentially the only way you can progress is if you work out every single day. If you want to work out with that reasonable frequency, we're talking once every 3, 4, 5 days, you're gonna have to find that sweet spot, and that's up to everyone because every individual is different. Me, I will probably be working out every muscle group 2 times per 8 days. So it's not 2 times per week, the way it works out with my rest days. So guys, I will keep you updated. Make sure you watch my vlogs if you're interested how I'm applying this program. How am I handling it? Is it too much frequency? Is it not enough? Do I want to increase it? Do I want to cut back on the volume? All of this stuff will be answered through trial and error in my upcoming vlog series. But for now, that is it, guys. That is the end of the video. I hope you learned something from this, and I hope you guys will give higher frequency training a try, and let me know how it works out for you if you did try it. If you like this video, like the video, and you can leave me a subscribe, leave me a... Why do I keep saying that? How do you leave a subscribe? Just do it anyway. And leave me a comment. I would love to hear your opinions on this video. But until then, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you guys. And if you, are just a viewer who's stopping by, yeah. But until then, guys, I hope you enjoyed this informational video, and I will see you in the next one.